what I'll do is I'll get started because people will file in and they really want to listen to you, Rufus. So I'll just go through all the housekeeping stuff. So welcome to the December 9th meeting of the British Empire Study Group. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are a bunch of philatelists who enjoy the social aspects, the technical aspects, and learning about British Empire. So we meet online, and if we're at a stamp show or a meeting, we'll do that. So we have a very liberal definition of the British Empire. Basically, if it flew through it, if it traveled through it, or if it was once part of the British Empire, it's all game for us. So if you have a suggestion of a topic, please feel free to shoot us a line. Okay, our next meeting is going to be on January 12th, 6 p.m. And this is going to be a favorite of ours, Ed Grabowski, who is going to do a new slant on Victor Segno and the international mail order fraud. So he's a fascinating speaker, and he has some really great material from this area. So it's one of those, I think most of these are not to miss. So a few housekeeping points for those of you who are not familiar with all the Zoom controls. This is a Zoom webinar. So while you can see us, we won't be able to see or hear you. So you communicate through us through either the chat. Chat is enabled, so you could talk to anybody and everyone. Or you could put your questions in the Q&A. And I would encourage you to use the Q&A so that way Robert could address those with Rufus at the end. So the little chat feature, one of the other comments that we've received is those little pop-ups about the chat. Some people find them annoying. You could just disable them by hitting the little hat key and then turn off the chat preview, and then they won't bother you during the presentation. Lastly, we have subtitles here. If you would like to see the subtitles, please feel free to use them. Some of our audience members find those very helpful with the speakers. And lastly, to control what you see, sometimes the way your Zoom's configured, you'll have a speaker end up in the middle of a slide. You could just click on the black and drag that around. And you could also control your view and how you look at them a little bit. So with that said, we still have the survey running. This will be the last week for the survey. So if you haven't gotten your answers in, please do. It will really help us direct how we're going to move the programs in the future. And at the end of this, we will have our normal social hour where you could talk to all of us, and more importantly, Rufus, and you could address your questions personally. So without any further ado, I turn it over to Rufus. And I guess I forgot to share the screen, right? So Robert, if you could introduce.
Great. Thank you, Joan. Good evening, everybody. Rufus Barnes has been collecting Tokelau for over 50 years. His extensive collection covers the period when stamps from the Gilbert and Ellice Islands and Western Samoa were used on Tokelau, up through the modern period, post-1948, when the islands began issuing their own stamps. Rufus is a past chairman of the Pacific Islands Study Circle and a past chairman of the Philatelic Congress of Great Britain. He's also the current chairman of the Burma, Myanmar Philatelic Study Circle, and is an active member of his local society, the Cambridge Philatelic Society. So without any further ado, let's have Rufus give us his presentation.
Good evening, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me to give this display this evening. So I'm going to show you what I have. It's not my whole collection at all, but it is the highlights of the collection, spread from 1911, when postal services were first introduced into the Tokelau Islands, and goes through until some point in the 1970s. The Tokelau Islands were originally known as the Union Islands, and they were part of the Gilbert and Ellice Island Protectorate from the early days, about 1877 through till 1926. This early unaddressed cover is one of the earliest covers known from the islands, and you can see that it is postmarked the General Post Office Union Group in the Gilbert and Ellice Protectorate, postmarked 15th of July 1911, and it has the early Gilbert and Ellice Islands Pandanus stamps. Magaly, as you can see here on the right, is a well-known collector of this early period of Gilbert and Ellice Island stamps, and we can see the stamps on both postmarked Atafu. And we then move on to what I'm showing next is probably the last known date of Gilbert and Ellice Island stamps used on the islands, addressed to a well-known philatelist, the Reverend Ironmonger, but as with people like Roger Wells, without Ironmonger and Wells, we wouldn't have examples of these postmarks. This is a particularly interesting cover because not only was it probably sent on the last mailing out of the Union Islands in 1925, before the islands were transferred to the control of New Zealand, and particularly more locally Samoa. It is registered. It is postmarked Atafu, as you can see, but the registration marking is Funafuti. And then we have the back stamp of Apia, and when it arrived in the United Kingdom, a back stamp at Birmingham on its way to the Reverend Ironmonger. So it is a particularly interesting cover, and I was very pleased to have one of the earliest Pandanus covers, and definitely the latest known Pandanus cover. And this is possibly one of the first mailings in the Samoa period. This might look like an unaddressed cover, but it isn't. The address, the name of the addressee and the address is on the back. So in those days, there were very, very few mailings out of the islands, very few contacts with the rest of the world. And so this cover from Whakaeofo is dated the 25th of June. I should explain, and I'm sorry I didn't do that earlier, that the island group is made up of 3 islands, Atafu, Whakaeofo, and the Kanunu. And within the geographical group, there is Swains Island, but that is not part of the same administrative territory. Swains Island is owned by the United States of America, and we will see some Swains Island covers in this display. This is a particularly poor example of a Whakaeofo registered cover and Whakaeofo postmark. Again, it is addressed to the Reverend Ironmonger in Bristol. The stamps of Australia and New Zealand have never been valid for use on the Union or the Tokelau Islands. But this cover dated the 22nd of January 1930, I think it is, has Australian stamps. Officially, the postmark should not have been used to frank the stamps, but should have been put to one side. But it has been used to frank the stamps. Now, I mentioned Swains Island. Swains Island is very collectible, and we have here covers addressed to Paul de Fenderfer, who I believe was the you can see, the superintendent of education in American Samoa, who was making a trip to Swains Island. Mail from Swains Island can be identified by the Swains Island straight line stamp, and usually the man who ran the copra business on the island, Mr. Jennings, signed above Swains Island. But here you can see Paul de Fenderfer was obviously a philatelist, and he persuaded Mr. Jennings to allow him to sign above Swains Island. This is one of only 2 registered covers known relating to Swains Island, and I am pleased to be able to show it. Difficult, as I say, to find, only one of only 2 known. And you can see the back of the cover there, where this has been addressed to Cincinnati in Ohio, and we've got the various back stamps here, Pango Pango, Cincinnati, and a really nice item. This cover is dated October 34. All these early covers are very difficult to find. This is a registered cover from Whakaeofo, 1935, showing the Samoan stamps overprinted for the Silver Jubilee of King George V. And one can find a number of covers addressed over a period of time to Messrs. Wilcox, Smith and Company at Dunedin in New Zealand. I imagine that somebody in that company was a philatelist and managed to get covers from the islands. These are quite interesting covers. They are clearly addressed to the same person in Seattle, and you can see here, slightly strangely, that the cover on the right came from Otafu, but the Otafu postmark was not used to cancel the stamp. The stamp wasn't cancelled until the cover got to Western Samoa. I've got no idea why that would happen. These stamps were properly used in the Tokelau Islands, or the Union Islands at the time. The United States Navy regularly had shakedown cruises for new ships, and when a ship arrived at a particular group of islands or a particular port, they put the name of the place they were visiting within the postmark, so that this was the shakedown cruise for the USS Maori, and you've got Swains Island within the postmark there. I was pleased to get this cover because the stamp dealer who sold it to me hadn't noticed that it was a Tokelau cover. He had clearly looked at the Apia Samoa registration label, and it was in his Samoa bundle of covers, but it is indeed postmarked at Whakeofo. This is one of, I think, only two censored covers out of the islands, and clearly I'm particularly pleased to have been able to get hold of it. This cover might not look particularly spectacular, but it was the subject of quite a lot of correspondence within the Pacific Island study circle. Not because of the stamps or the date, but because of the registration label, which is GPO Sydney, New South Wales. Those of you who collect Australia will recognise that the cross on the cover is in red, which is quite normal for Australian mail. The postage paid was okay with Samoan stamps, but it was clearly crossed for registration, but was not registered at Nukununu when the cover was dispatched. So when it arrived in New South Wales and Sydney, they put on this registration label, and I really didn't know what the red O I thought P, but after a lot of toing and froing, we decided it wasn't OP but OR, and it stands for Overseas Registration. So it had arrived in Australia without a registration label, and then had this registration label put on, and then indicating the circumstances of its transit, the OR hand stamp was put on. Two more covers here, this time with all of the then Western Samoa definitive stamps up to the 3 shilling, used on the 4th of November 1946. Now we come to the period of airmail dropped covers, and these occurred in 1947. They're a particularly interesting series of covers. The one on the left, you might just be able to see first mail dropped by plane at Nukununu. The second one, they'd taken the first out, and it's mail dropped by plane at Nukununu. So we've got the 8th of January and the 22nd of January. We move forward to the 3rd and 4th flights. By this time, the Fijian stamp dealer, Mr. Costello, had realized that there was something going on, and he produced these covers. And then we come to May, and these are allegedly extremely scarce covers. You do see them for sale on eBay from time to time, and whereas the all the other flights, all the mail was dropped at Nukununu, in May in 1947, by a strange coincidence, all of the radios on all three islands had broken down. So there was a lack of communication from with the island. So there was a request made to drop mail and radio equipment to each of the islands. So you can see that that these covers have got typed on also first flight over Whakaeofo and Otafu. And so these are particularly scarce, and it is alleged that there were only 12 covers dropped over each of the islands on that flight, because it was particularly for this radio equipment. And here is the one for Otafu, with the Otafu arrival mark on the left. And then the final airdrop on the 27th of July 1947, and this cover is addressed to Roger Wells, who I referred to earlier. When it arrived in Nukununu, the postmaster put the wrong date there, and all the covers have the date corrected from June to July. This is one of a very scarce item, an OHMS cover. I believe that this one is genuinely postally used from Whakaeofo to Apia to the Chief Inspector of Schools. No stamps, just relying on the OHMS. And the second one addressed, the first one was the 12th of June 1947. The second one is the 9th of September 1947, addressed to the postmaster in Apia, again OHMS. I don't know whether this is philatelic or genuinely postally used, but they are, these OHMS covers are very difficult to find. Then it had been decided, two things were decided. First of all, to change the name of the islands from the Tokelau Islands to from the Union Islands to the Tokelau Islands, and secondly, to introduce the stamps for the islands themselves. These covers are postmarked on the last day of Samoan stamp validity on the islands, and they are there, Otafu at the top, then Whakaeofo, and then Nukununu, and all on the 21st of June 1948. There we have the three stamps that were issued in 1948, the 22nd of June, and those are proofs cut up from a proof sheet at the bottom and a die proof of the border of the penny stamp up above. Any philatelist would be appalled to look at the bottom left-hand pair of stamps, where this is clearly from the sheet of stamps that was approved for printing, and whoever has cut this up deserves to be, I don't know what should be done to them, because they've actually only taken part of the approved, and the other part is on some other pair of stamps or some other stamp. Quite appalling that somebody should have done that to that proof. This is an interesting cover. I told you the stamps were issued on the 22nd of June 1948. These stamps are postmarked on the 16th of June 1948. Now, it wouldn't really matter on any other occasion, but this meant that the stamps appear to have been postmarked before they were actually issued, and indeed before the very first stamps of the Tokelau Islands were issued. It turned out after some research that what had happened was that when a visiting New Zealand naval ship visited the islands on the 16th of July 1948, the postmaster at Nukununu forgot to change the month part of the date stamp, and so actually these stamps were postmarked on the 16th of July, not the 16th of June. There was a special airmail that took place on the 22nd of August 1949, and this special airmail was supposed to be testing for airmail to come out of the islands, not into the island. But it appears that about 10 covers were sent out on the flight from Western Samoa to the Tokelau Islands, so that if one comes across any of the covers going into the Tokelau Islands, they are particularly scarce. These are the covers going out of the islands, and they have a first flight cachet on them. And again, Mr. Costello, who we saw earlier on the earlier flight cover, the airmail drop covers, got in on this. This is a strange cover. Captain Ostenfeld of the Union Shipping Company probably was a philatelist, or if he wasn't, maybe the purser was a philatelist, and these stamps were postmarked with the ship's rectangular stamp, the SS Waihemo, and signed by the purser, and they've claimed this to be a pakebo cover. Well, it's the only one I've ever seen like this, and it certainly is very interesting. It has the square mark there, and then each of the stamps has also got a straight line, SS Waihemo, on. This is quite unusual. This cover, addressed to France, was originally postmarked on the 13th of January 1958 at Otafu, and then it must have missed the ship and ended up not leaving the island until the next ship 3 months later, and the stamps were re-postmarked the 14th of March 1958. These are particularly nice covers. The Governor General of New Zealand visited the island in August 1959, I think that is, and this cover was sent from either from the Governor General personally, because you can see we have here the crown, which indicates it is from the Governor General, but it could have been from his wife, addressed to Edgbaston in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. So very, very nice, very collectible, sent from the HMNZS Royalist, which was the ship that was carrying the Governor General. We have here the first of the decimal stamps. The Tokelau group issued 7 stamps when decimalization took place in 1967. They, as we'll see, overprinted the original 1948 stamps into 1 cent, 2 cents, and 10 cents, and then issued some more of the New Zealand arm stamps overprinted. You can see here the ghost floor on the 5 cent stamp here. There's the full set of stamps. Because the islands don't have a regular contact with the outside world, these stamps were issued by the New Zealand Post Office on the 10th of July 1967, but the first outgoing mail, as indicated here, was the 4th of September. Now, I'm showing this particular cover because one stamp in every sheet of the of this overprint has the words Tokelau and Islands closer together. You can see there is the close setting, and it's quite a challenge to find the close setting stamps. Even more of a challenge to find the close setting stamps on cover. The name of Nukununu was changed, and a new postmark was requested. The original name for Nukununu was Nukunono, and they changed it to Nukunonu, and they ordered a new postmark from New Zealand. But one can only assume that they said, we'd like a new postmark reflecting the new name of the island. And they forgot to say, well, we continue to want to have the Tokelau Islands along the bottom here. So for a short period of time, there was this postmark used, just saying Nukununu and nothing around the bottom. So I have quite a few of these in my collection with all the known dates in 1967 and 1968. In 1969, the islands issued a set of 4 stamps depicting the historical dates relating to the Tokelau Islands. So we have 1877, that became a British protectorate. 1916 became part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. 1925 transferred to New Zealand control. And in 1948, it became a New Zealand territory. I don't know how this was arranged, but on this occasion, the postmaster signed the cover, and this was the first occasion where apparently a date stamp was produced for the covers marking the first day of issue. However, they forgot to request that it should also have the names of the islands individually, and that should be 3 of these. And so for this first occasion, this mark was used as a cachet to show that it was used on the first day of issue. This is an unusual occurrence. In 1969 and 1970, the islands issued a Christmas stamp using the same design as the stamp for New Zealand. And it appears that one sheet of the New Zealand stamp ended up being applied at the New Zealand Philatelic Bureau onto covers for use, first day covers for the Tokelau Islands. And there we see this these New Zealand stamps postmarked on the Tokelau Islands. They were not valid for use there. Oops. The islands decided that they needed to have an official postage paid permit postmark, and they had permit number 1 and permit number 2. They are particularly difficult to find because whereas you could ask the post office to apply any of the different postmarks that they held on your covers, they wouldn't respond to requests to have the postage paid permit used on covers. So it was purely by chance if you ended up getting one. This one is even stranger in that it has the postage paid permit mark on, addressed to the Philatelic Bureau in New Zealand, but then on the inside of the cover there is the receival mark at the Philatelic Bureau. I'm not quite sure how that happened or why it happened, but it did. This is, to the best of my knowledge, the only known international reply coupon with a Nukununu postmark. Having said that, I'll probably now be inundated by people saying, I've got one, but I'm not aware of any other international reply coupon with a Tokelau Island postmark. The islands produced had produced for them a rubber cachet registration mark, and there are 2 of them seen here. They were all used around, the only known use is around the 10th and 11th of February 1971, and they are very collectible. Eventually, they decided that they needed to replace the interim decimal definitives with a set of stamps showing the handwork on the island, and these were designed by a lady originally from, I think it was Hull in the United Kingdom, called Enid Hunter. And at some point, some of her artwork for these stamps, not identical, but you can see that how they eventually came to be the stamps. Some of the artwork came on sale, and there we've got the bags. Here we have an interesting printing floor you can see in the middle here, some of the green has gone spilled over into the margin, and some of the green here has spilled over to cover some of the value mark. Then Eileen Mayo designed some fish stamps for the islands, and some of her absolutely beautiful, intricate artwork also came onto the market, and I was pleased to be able to get this one item. And here you can see a non-consistent error here on the D. Whoops. You can see that the upright doesn't exist there, but I believe it's non-consistent, that it was corrected during the printing. One of the rarest of the postmarks is the postmark seen on these two covers. Not very clearly on the bottom one, but on the top one you can see at the top here there is a roller date stamp, and this was produced because they wanted to have something that they could apply to parcels, but it didn't last very long and was eventually withdrawn. This cover addressed to me contained various covers that I'd ordered from the post office, and I was pleased that it actually had the post permit paid or postage paid permit mark on it. And this one is in some ways even better. It's tattier, but it has permit number 2, which is definitely scarcer than permit number 1, and it's registered. And I was in the habit in those days, when I ordered the covers from the islands, to ask them to register them and to send me the registration receipt. So whenever these permit marks were used, there was no postmark on the cover. But lo and behold, I then got, in a different envelope, the registration receipt relating to this very cover, so that I know that it was sent on the 28th of January 1978. And this is the only known example of both the permit number 1 and permit number 2 used on the same envelope. It is philatelic, clearly, and it's addressed to a well-known stamp collector. Here we have another example of my getting the registration receipt to go with a particular cover. Now, this the other thing that I wanted to try and get hold of were covers going into the island, and this one is to me particularly interesting. You'll remember that I told you that the islands changed their name in 1948 from the Union Islands to the Tokelau Island. And this cover, which was sent to me by the Office of Tokelau Affairs was correctly addressed to the Postmaster General, Tokelau Islands, South Pacific, and somebody somewhere en route from Poland crossed out Tokelau Islands and put Union Islands via Apia, Western Samoa, and that was in the 1970s. So isn't it amazing that some post office records somewhere in the world were still showing this as being the Union Islands? This is also quite interesting. In 1981, the Office for Tokelau Affairs was getting so many requests for philatelic mail that they decided to produce a philatelic cover that could be used to fulfill these. And it was used for the first time on the 10th of November 1981. However, you will see on the left here that I received a bundle of covers, all with this special cover, postmarked the 10th of November 1975, which is in fact before any of these stamps were issued. And then the day after came through the post these correctly postmarked covers. So I don't know what happened, but they clearly made a mistake there. This cover is interesting because it was postmarked originally May 1983 at Whakaeofo, and then the postmark was covered up with another postmark dated the 18th of November 83 from Nukununu. I have no idea why that should have happened, but it did. This cover was sent to me, registered, and the stamps are postmarked the 23rd of November 1984. The stamps were not issued until early December 1984, and this very cover resulted in Stanley Gibbons putting a note in their catalogue that some stamps of this issue are known postmarked 23rd of November 1984. This set of stamps showing trees on the island, and here are some imperforate proofs of that issue. This set of stamps showing architecture of the islands, issued on the 4th of December 1985, there is a clear double print on the 18 cents value of the black colour. The rest you can see the black colour is nice and clear, but there's a clear double print on that value. In 1990, the islands issued a miniature sheet marking the 150th anniversary of the penny black. The miniature sheet is not catalogued by Gibbons, but is catalogued by other catalogue producers. They argued that at the time, the New Zealand Post Office was responsible for producing the stamps of the Tokelau Islands, but this was not produced by the New Zealand Post Office, and they've refused to catalogue it. These are the proofs from the Courvoisier archive when it was sold off, and you can see this is the final miniature sheet. I have covers with this stamp, with this miniature sheet on, Tokelau $3, postmarked from the Tokelau Islands. The islands regarded it as a legitimate issue, but but Stanley Gibbons have refused to accept the fact that it was on sale on the islands and dispatched from the islands. This is a bit of fun, really. This cover from East Germany was sent to the Philatelic Bureau in Otafu on the Tokelau Islands. Now, as you may be aware if you speak German, the German for Iceland is ISLAND, and this cover found its way to Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, before it was then forwarded to the Tokelau Islands. This cover was sent from Nukununu in 1982, properly addressed to me in Essex, and it went via a very small town in Algeria called Issa. This has resulted in some level of extra interest because of the postage paid permit number 5. I visited Samoa in 1983 and spent some time in the post office, and they have a series of these postage paid permits, and it appears that this was probably applied in Samoa, but for no obviously good reason, because the stamps were properly postmarked in Nukununu, the right rate for postage, and why a Samoan postage paid permit number 5 has been applied to the cover, I don't know. And that is my collection. So I'm going to stop sharing. I hope you found it interesting, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you may have.
Rufus, we got a question from Daryl Templer. He asks, were there non-philatelic mailings from the islands using the first issue of Tokelau stamps?
With a non-philatelic mailing, yes. There's very little mail that gets sent to anywhere other than Samoa and New Zealand. New Zealand, because it's a New Zealand territory, and a number of the islanders' families have over time moved to New Zealand. But Steve Zarinsky, who I see as his name has come up there, he has over the years managed to obtain covers that have been sent to a range of philatelists around the world, but genuine postally used covers are not easy to find.
What was the population on the islands back at that point?
I think probably about 1,500 in total at one point. Not very many.
Okay.
Well, Rufus, as you notice, I'm starting to bring people over because there's a lot of people who'd like to talk to you. But before I give up the stage, how did you get into this area? Because it's such a small area.
Well, as was said by Robert at the beginning, I started collecting seriously when I was quite young. So I was given my first Stanley Gibbons Part 1 catalogue in 1967 when I was just 14. So I didn't have a vast amount of money available to me. So I looked at the catalogue and decided that I was going to try and find places where I thought I'd be able to buy all the stamps relatively quickly. So I decided on a very small number of territories, which ranged from Abu Dhabi and Christmas Island and the Cocos-Keeling Islands, British Antarctic Territory, South Georgia, Australian Antarctic Territory, and the Tokelau Islands. I had at that stage, as a young philatelist, no knowledge of postal history. And when I discovered postal history, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to continue to collect that range of territories. And I sold off a number of collections in order to be able to enhance the collections that I wanted to stay with. And one of the countries I wanted to stay with was the Tokelau Islands.
Very interesting. Now, I'll ask you, when you come over, please turn on your camera so we can see you.
I can't seem to figure out how to do that. It seemed to have not worked. Anyway.
Good evening, Stephen. How are you?
Rufus, good to see you. Good to see you. I had a couple, fascinating. Now I see why you spend so much time poring over each Tokelau envelope at someone's table. There's a lot going on. One thing I noticed, I think the permit number 5 in Samoa is actually the Tokelau desk, where the mail comes in. I have to check my numbers and all that for that, but I believe that's what that's for. So they may have been concerned that it was going to get returned to sender or some such thing like that. So on the way out, as the mailbag was going, they decided to give it a shot, you know.
Yes, I've got a list of all of the numbers allocated to the different organizations
Right.
in Samoa.
Yeah, I think I did
but
too.
the numbers changed at some point in the early 2000s. So you have to have the 2 sets of numbers. But it is quite possible that that was the Tokelau desk that applied it. But it's and it might have been a checking mechanism. But it is nevertheless not usual to find both stamps and a permit number on the same cover.
I agree. Certainly.
You will have noticed the registered Swains Island cover that I bought from you, I think, some years back, of which there are only 2 known.
Right. Well, thank you. I didn't know there were only 2. I have a Swains Island with a bisect on it sitting here.
All right. That's all I'm saying, Stephen. I'm not saying anything other than, oh, right.
Who are Gilbert and Ellis?
I don't know.
Weren't they English? Oh, that's Gilbert and Sullivan. Oh,
Yeah,
Gilbert and
I was thinking
Sullivan.
that, but that's not it.
I think people are often quite surprised that you can make such a big display out of such a small territory, and that there's so much that one can find. But over the years, I've been looking at the earlier material more than the modern material. In fact, I stopped collecting new Tokelau material in 1998 on the 50th anniversary of the issue of the first stamps, because I felt that the islands were issuing too many stamps, which undermined the whole reason that I'd started collecting in the first place. But I've really enjoyed finding new earlier items, particularly looking at small auctions where the vendor quite clearly doesn't know what it is that's being sold. Isn't that what we as philatelists always want to do? We want to find something special and that others have missed.
Yep, that makes sense. I think it was a great display. I love seeing all these little islands, as you might gather.
Yeah, yeah.
Anne, you have a question?
Hi there. I don't have a question. I was just going to make one quick comment. I collect Princess Elizabeth stamps, i.e. stamps issued depicting Princess Elizabeth while she was still a princess, 1932 to 1951. And I have a number of covers with the New Zealand peace issue on them, which Rufus showed on some of his covers. And I actually have one cover from the Union Islands, and it's the first day of usage of the overprinted Western Samoa peace issue stamps.
Right.
And the cover, it says right on it, first day of use in Union Tokelau Islands, and it's postmarked 4th of November, 1946. It's the same cachet that Rufus showed with the palm tree and the peace commemorative cover written underneath.
Yes, I think that I don't want to blank you all out, but I have a feeling if I wasn't showing it there, I certainly have got that cover with the first day of issue of the peace stamps used on the island.
Well, it's the
Yeah.
only cover I have seen of that particular issue, the one that I have. I'm sure there's more, but I've been working on this Princess Elizabeth collection fairly seriously ever since last January. And this came up on eBay, and it was not expensive, but it's the only time I've seen something of note from the Tokelaus on eBay, and I peruse through every few weeks or so. So I was quite pleased to get it because I figured it wasn't the most common usage of a Princess Elizabeth stamp.
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. But I'm glad that you found something that you could add to your collection. I
Tony,
can see
sorry.
I can see some of my British philatelic friends here. It's good to see them. I'm lost him now. Richard Moss was here a moment ago. Yes, I see Richard. And John Spencer was here a moment ago. I saw him. Yeah, there he is. Good to see you.
Right,
Somebody's
Rufus,
got their hand up. Richard Livingston.
yes, Rufus, so you've got a magnificent collection. You said you went to Western Samoa.
Yeah.
Did you also go to the Tokelau's yourself?
This is a sad story, Tony. A very sad story. In 2003, I was 50 years old, and my wife took me around the world, and the whole timing of the trip was based on getting to Samoa to catch the then I think bi-monthly ship out to the Tokelau Islands. So the whole of the trip was booked. Our passage on the ship was booked, and the day before we flew out to begin our trip around the world, I thought I'll just phone the Tokelau Island. I'll just phone the office for Tokelau Affairs in Samoa to confirm all is well. And much to my absolute horror and great sadness, the people said, we've forgotten to tell you that the ship has been commandeered by the South Pacific Commission for an official visit to the Tokelau Islands. We've put you on the next ship in October. Well, I was a working man, and the whole of my round the world trip was based on being in Samoa at the right time to go to the Tokelau Islands. Now, the only good thing about it, well, there were two good things. One was that the Catholic priest from Nukununu was in exactly the same position as we were, Father Patrick O'Connor, and so he found
yes.
himself. You knew O'Connor, didn't you, Stephen?
No, John, I did not know him, but John, continue. I'll remember his name in a minute.
Right. Well, anyway, we found ourselves in Samoa with Patrick O'Connor, and my wife and I met him on 3 occasions and had spent some really enjoyable times with him, which was very good. And the second thing was, and this is far more of a coincidence, that one of my university friends had a daughter who was training in Manchester in England to be a doctor. And part of her training involved her going on a foreign trip to do some special project. And she had decided, totally unbeknown to me, to go to Samoa to study to study diabetes amongst the Polynesian people. And she was there at exactly the same time that we were there. And so we ended up seeing her and spending some time with her. We ended up having more time in Samoa, so we went to the second island, and much to my wife's amazement, we hired a car and drove all around the island, visiting each of the post offices and sending registered covers to myself from each of the post offices in Samoa. So there were some interesting asides, but that's what philatelists do, isn't it?
Mm, mm.
Drives the other half crazy. It's John
Yes.
Krupnik, the person I was thinking
John
of.
Krupnik, yes.
And I was just in communication with the liaison of the Tokelau office in Apia last week, and they because I want to get more envelopes, canceled there, and they said, "Oh no, we're not doing that anymore." So,
Tony Ward, you had a question, and I know
Yes.
we've been keeping you waiting.
Yes, I've asked.
Yeah, I've answered Tony's question.
Oh, terrific. Where was I? John.
Richard Livingston had his hand up a little time ago
Oh,
to
sorry.
ask a question.
Oh, okay. Greatly enjoyed your talk. I collected the first 5 stamps of the Tokelau Islands some time ago, but had never seen any postal history. I do have an announcement that I think might be of interest to British Empire collectors. Apex in McLean, Virginia, is having a special award for exhibits showing Queen Elizabeth II. This is an honor to the late Queen, and Apex is having a special award. The dates of Apex in 2023 will be June 2nd to June 4th, and we hope that people might want to, from the British Empire Society, might want to participate and to know about this special award. Once again, greatly enjoyed your talk. Most
Glad you did.
Well, thank you, Richard. We'll definitely put that on the website so everyone knows. That's a great, great theme. Great, very creative.
John, Lori, you.
John, we can't hear you.
Gonna unmute himself.
No, he is he's not unmuted. Well, let me try muting him and then ask him to unmute there. Let's see if that works.
Now try unmuting, John.
No, we still can't hear you, John.
You could write it up in the chat and see if Joan will.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good idea, John. Write your question in the chat so Joan can read it out. I did find out who Gilbert and Ellis was. It was a sea captain, Thomas Gilbert, discovered the islands and given credit for it by a Spanish sea captain. And the Ellis Island was specifically given to another captain. Ellis was a policeman and official who owned most of the cargo that was on the ship that this captain was on.
Right.
It's interesting to see that they thought of it as distinct groupings of islands.
Yeah. I think one of them was known for phosphates and is now fisheries, and the other one actually was mentioned in Congress as Tuvalu, the island that would sink into the Pacific because there were too many people on it at the time.
Yes, the Tuvalu and Kiribati. Tuvalu is the former Ellis Islands, and Kiribati, the former Gilbert Islands, are very low-lying, and there is great fear about their future.
I did one last thing. I think it might be true of in these areas. There is a sunken continent called Zealandia that surrounds New Zealand and has built up a lot of fisheries. So it's kind of shallow. It's a shallow part of the Pacific. So I guess that has meant that there's a lot of fishing around the islands.
They don't issue stamps, do they?
No.
Now, Zealandia is it sank about 32,000 years ago. Seismic activities. But if you look at the map, it's a shallow part of the ocean.
Stephen, you need to get turtle mail from there.
Thanks, Tony.
I am so
I'm
curious
working on
about.
it as we speak.
I'm curious about how these islands figure in the history of the Polynesians. I wasn't able to see anything about that yet.
One of my other collecting interests is Easter Island, and Easter Island is the furthest east in the Pacific of of where the Polynesians got to. And there was a diplomatic row in the 1980s between the French and the Chileans because the French Polynesia issued stamps showing the extent of the Polynesian movement across the Pacific, and they showed 2 stamps showing Easter Island, and Chile decided to get it into its head that this was an indication that the French were wanting to take over Easter Island. They got very upset.
Now, do you know at all, China has been very active in that part of the Pacific. They're not quite buying the islands out, but they're giving a heck of a lot of aid to the governments. They dominate the island governments.
Yes, I don't think that this has affected the Tokelau Islands because they're still officially part of New Zealand. But you are entirely right that there has been a great deal of Chinese activity, and indeed they have actually paid for the production of a number of stamp issues for some of the islands.
We have John's comments in the chat.
Let's hear
and
it.
He was just explaining that Gilbert was a Russian admiral who named it after Thomas Gilbert, who had, well, you guys could read it, who had encountered it in the island in 1788. And Ellis was a British politician. Wow, didn't know that. And Wilcox Smith issued a philatelic monthly back in 1926. Wow, and there's some copies. That's John, I am so sorry your microphone isn't working. You know, the only thing I could suggest was hit the little hat and try to select a different microphone. That might work. So by the microphone, there's that little TP-like thing, and sometimes if you have more than one mic.
Works.
Did that work?
No, that one doesn't work either.
Yes, it does.
We hear you.
We hear
You
you.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. Okay. Well, those are my 2 comments, really. I've got some copies of this Wilcox Smith philatelic monthly that they issued. It's obviously a philatelic dealer of some sort down in
Yes.
Dunedin,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's on your early one.
Wilcox,
Sorry,
I had a cover address to them, didn't I?
Yes.
I
you
think I've
did,
got
yeah,
one.
the first one.
I think I've got more than one.
yeah, there are
Good
thousands
evening.
of others addressed to Wilcox Smith, and yes, it was Dunedin, but the name of I forget the name, but the name of the person concerned was not Wilcox Smith. That was more the company name than the name of the person. There was
That's
no
correct.
called Wilcox Smith. Yeah.
Yeah, the philatelic monthly thing is called Wilcox Smith's with an
Right.
apostrophe S. Yeah.
And good evening to Hugh Jeffries. Good evening to you, Hugh. Nice to see you.
Mm.
Hello.
Hello. Very
Hello,
nice.
Rufus. Good,
Did you-
very
were you on?
interesting.
You were on for my display, were you? You were up for it.
Yes, I saw nearly all of it. I'm afraid I missed the very first part of it, but I saw most of it, and including the bit about Stanley Gibbons refusing to list
Oh, no.
your miniature sheet.
Yes.
I'm not taking the blame for that, but yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to look into things, and we can reconsider them if you know, the evidence is right. I did have one question for you, Rufus. Has anybody ever compiled a listing of the various Gilbert and Ellis and Samoan stamps that are known to have been used in Tokelau?
Oh, shades of Pitcairn.
Yes, Tony Burgess, who wrote the definitive book on Tokelau philately, lists basically the stamps that he is aware of that were used in the islands. So if you've got the Tokelau handbook produced by it was issued jointly by the Pacific Island Study Circle and the British Philatelic Trust, and it does have a list of the stamps used.
I shall look into that. Thank you. We may have one in the SG library, but I've not actually seen it. I shall have to have a look.
I'm curious, these books, how many tend to be printed?
What of these books?
Yeah, those sorts of books. How about in the hundreds, in the thousands? Is it?
About 200, I think, were produced of this, something like that. I think the stock of them now is held. The remaining stock, I think, was bought by Mowbray of New Zealand. So I think you'd need to go to Mowbray's because Mowbray for some time was the philatelic agent for the Tokelau Islands.
Are they priced like law journals and scholarly journals, which tend to be a little bit high in price because of the low printing?
Well, it wasn't originally. I'm not sure how much Mowbray's selling them for now. I've got to go before too long. I've got to, unfortunately, go for a hospital appointment tomorrow morning.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
If there's one or two more questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to say good night to you. Well, for me, it's good night. It's midnight. I hope you've enjoyed the display.
Thank you so much, Rufus.
Thanks, Rufus.
Fantastic. I didn't know one small island could make so many stamps.
That's the
Great.
trouble these days. The smallest of places can issue the largest number of stamps, as Hugh will know only too well.
Oh, yes.
And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. You guys are fantastic.
I'll try and put together another display in due course and offer it up to Joan if she's interested.
Yeah, because I totally blew it with Christmas Island because someone told me, "Oh, don't worry, they're close. They're close." It's like, okay, I guess they're in the same ocean, but not.
There are, as I say, you may not be aware that there are 3 Christmas islands. There's Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean, which is what I collect. Christmas Island in the Pacific Ocean, which was where the British trialed their atomic bombs and is part of the Republic of Kiribati now. And there's a small Christmas Island off the east coast of Canada.
The Christmas Island and the Gilberts, now I think it's called Kirimati.
Something like that. Yeah,
About
that's
that,
right,
yeah.
Steve.
The post office there told me a month or two ago, they sent me some beautiful cancels from all the post offices, and all with the same date. And I said, "Oh, this must be from your bureau." "Oh yeah, of course." And they said, "Yes, of course." Because otherwise you can never get them all on the same date. So they keep separate postmarks at the head post office. But I said, "Well, can I get some from the outer islands?" They go, "No, you can't." But why? He says, "Well, we've been waiting for new postmarks, and no one for the last 2 or 3 years, but because of COVID and supply chain issues, no one has any postmarks and postmarkers, and they're all terrible. No one can read anything." So, so anyway, so if you get a recent postmark from these islands, from a lot of these islands, they're not real, because everything's all. It's that way with a lot of islands. Marshall Islands is like that. FSM is like that. Same problem.
Yeah.
That's going to be
Years
going on for a
ago.
while, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. some years ago, I went on a river cruise in Myanmar, Burma, and we stopped off at some little village to have a look around, and I espied the post office. And so I thought, well, this will be good. I'll go in and address a cover to myself and send it to myself. So I rattled the door and some lady wandered up and she opened her wallet that contained all the important things for the post office. It had 2 stamps in it, a broken date stamp, and a number of registration labels and registration receipts. So I filled in a registration receipt. She glued together the postmark and she put on the 2 stamps. And I thought, I'll never see this again. When the cover turned up at my home in the United Kingdom, about 2 months later, somebody en route had added extra stamps, and which I hadn't paid for, and it arrived with me very safely. So it is a prize item in my Myanmar modern collection.
That would be an
Anyway.
interesting conversation.
Yeah, Myanmar itself would be interesting because of, they've had an interesting last 4 decades or whatever, you know, as a country.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Rufus.
Well,
Right,
Rufus,
I'm
good
going
luck
to say good
tomorrow.
night to you.
Good
night.
night.
Good luck.
Rufus. Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you all. See you again sometime.